So how do you know what business model to use for yourself as an artist? First of all, if you haven't watched the one on business models, make sure you watch that. Second of all, here are the questions that you need to ask if you want to know what business models to use. So number one is, how will it make money? Now, the good thing about creating a business for yourself is that you are in control of everything. It might be daunting to think about that, but it's actually a lot of power in it. You decide how it will make money. So if you want 13 different ways for you as a creative to make money through your art form, check the video out, 13 business models for creatives. You're thinking about several revenue streams, and bearing in mind, as different products and services develop, you will not just have one way of making money. You might have multiple, and that's okay. Number two is, what are your KPIs? Now, KPI stands for key performance indicators. How do you know you're being successful? Is it how much money you make? Is it the references that you get from your students going to bring in other students to you? Is it how they feel when they're at your concerts? Is it feedback forms? Is it impact statements? How do you know that you're doing well? What are your key performance indicators? How do you acquire each different customer? And how many repeat or lifetime rates do you have? So for example, if you have one customer, how many times do they come back to you? Do they keep going to every concert you put on, every gallery, every performance or show? And how much do they invest in you over a lifetime? So if there's one customer who's a regular, how much do they actually spend per month, for example, on my products and services? They might have a subscription to the things I do. They might be buying my products. They might be coming to my classes and have booked my retreat. How much is all that worth to me overall? These are things to consider when putting together your products and services, so you know how much you can actually, what levels of involvement they can get to. Number three is, who is your target customer? And these aren't in any particular order, by the way, but they're all really important. So who your target customer is going to dictate, one, what their capacity for spending will be, two, where they'll be, which means that you need to be put in front of them, and three, what is the value to them? Like, what are the pains and what are the interests that they have? What is their demographic, but also their psychographic? Who are they as a person? What matters to them? Once you know those things, you'll be able to cater your marketing in such a way that you're, one, in front of the people that will resonate with you the most, and two, will be able to have what we call copy. The way you type, what you write, what you say to them will go directly towards their direct needs, which will let them see that you're the one for them. One of the things we as artists need to get over is the idea of quote unquote selling. If you have something that will genuinely help someone, will make them feel good, will help them with their healing process, will give them something to do with their children, they will thank you for it because it is valuable to them. You're actually doing them a service. And if you don't do it, then they'll go somewhere else. And that place where they go may not actually be as good as what you're offering them. So I just wanted to put that in there. And also, the last thing is, what problem are you serving? All these questions will be depending on what kind of products and services you do, but these are all questions to ask. Number four, how will the product or service benefit the customer? This is kind of linked to the other one, and difficult to know how to answer this if you haven't answered the previous one. So how will your product and service benefit the customer? There's something called a value proposition, and it basically looks at what are their needs, what are their goals, what are their aspirations. If it's, for example, status, how will them being in your company raise that status? For example, if you have a show which is at the Royal Opera House, for example, that's going to attract a certain amount of people, certain kind of people, partly because of the content of what you're doing as a show, but also partly because of the venue, because the venue is such a place where it's considered to be a certain status. If you are if the person has the need for culture and connection with their culture, and you're doing a show or a song or a painting or an event, an exhibition, which is around that culture, know that when the people come there, the value is not just that they're going to see a painting, but they might see something that connects to their heritage, which is something that they will find really important for them, but then also their children, right? So these is where you start to go to the value to the customer, which is really important. The next one is number 5. What expenses will I have? This is a really practical one. So studio fees, hire for products and services, anything, vehicle, transportation, all those kind of things are important here. And it's good to see what are fixed and what are variable, what are always going to be there, like your office rent and all that kind of stuff. If you have your co-working space or subscription to WeWork, for example, for your meetings, what are those fixed ones versus what are your variable ones, which are the ones that only happen when there's a show. The reasons why these are important is because you got to put that into your budget for your year. You got to know that instead of having to do all these fundraising options, put money away each month and make sure that every month you have enough in your coffers to be able to cover your show, for example, so you don't have to look at Arts Council every time and things like that. Okay, so number 6 is, what is the problem? And I mentioned this before for the client. What is the problem they're trying to solve? How important is it for it to be solved is a huge one. Is it an immediate thing? So if, for example, you were to go back to the pandemic and George Floyd, for example, things that were on the back burner for a lot of things become very immediate during that time. All of a sudden, everyone was talking about race, culture, identity, and racism in general. So anyone who was doing anything along those lines had immediate upsell in what they were doing. If you were in unconscious bias, for example, that was there, but it also trickled into the arts. You would have noticed huge shifts in anyone who was doing music, anyone who's doing dance shows or anything in local communities, for example, where they didn't have any attention beforehand, all of a sudden got attention, right? So it's important to know what is the problem, but how important is it to be solved? What is the context? Is it global? Is it local? And then also having a look at the stats. And I know we as artists, we tend to be more creative minded than logical, but it's really important to have a look at the stats. What is trending at the moment? Not just on things like TikTok, but just in the global sense. What are people talking about? Is it climate change? Is it gender-based violence? Is it poverty or empowerment or anything? What are the things that are talking about in a global sense that we can touch on in our art form? And the last part as well on here is the ask. At some point, your business model has got to be able to say, this is what I need, right? Especially if you're doing a proposal, for example, and you're, I know I mentioned funding earlier on, but if you have an investor or a sponsor that you're sitting across from, is you got to have the ask. You got to know what is the ask from your clients, your customers, your investors, your sponsors. What are you actually asking for? Is it, what is the scale of money you're asking for and for how long? So for example, like I said, how much the returns and projections, that is going to help you look at your impacts. So just to recap, when you're thinking about creating a business model for yourself, some of the questions that you want to ask are, how will it make money? What are my key performance indicators? How do I know it's doing well? Who is the target customer? How will my product or service benefit them? What expenses will I have? What is the problem that my client or customer is trying to solve with my product? And what do I want for them? The ask. Is it money? Is it time? Is it energy? That kind of thing. If you have any other thoughts on what you need to put into when you're thinking about creating a business plan or a business model or a pitch, for example, put it in the comments. Let's have a talk about it.